couple weeks ago, before the snowpocalypse, we started talking about trust in 1 Kings, really talking about Elijah. And we talked about famine and drought and ravens bringing food and all kinds of stuff. And today I want us to continue down that path in 1 Kings chapter 18. Now this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I know I say that a lot, but this is top 3 for me. This is a story about one against many. You see, Elijah is found by Obadiah, and Obadiah tells Ahab where he is. Ahab's been looking for him, the king. He's been looking for him because Elijah told him, hey, it's not going to rain until I tell it to rain. And so Obadiah meets Ahab and tells him what Elijah has told Obadiah. And then Ahab meets Elijah. And here's what happens in chapter 18, verse 17. In 1 Kings 18:17, it says, when Ahab saw Elijah, he said to him, is that you troubler of Israel? Well, this is funny because Ahab is widely known as a terrible king. He was evil. Did evil in the sight of the Lord. He followed other gods, and it just wasn't pretty. And so it's kind of funny that he calls Elijah, you troubler of Israel. But look at verse 18. I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Elijah fires right back and says, it's not me that's trouble, it's you. You are the one that's been causing trouble. And so we're going to figure this out. We're going to settle this right now. You go and get all those prophets of Baal, and you come to Mount Carmel, and it's time for a showdown. And so Ahab does. He sends word for all these prophets to come to Mount Carmel. So look at verse 21. Elijah went before the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. He says, hey, there's no reason for you to keep flip-flopping back and forth. For 1 minute for you to follow the true living God, and then the next follow Baal. No. If there can only be one true God. And if the true God is the God of Israel, follow him. If the true God is the God Baal, well then follow him. But don't keep going back and forth. Don't keep being wishy-washy here. Like, decide who is who. It says that the people said nothing though. And then verse 22. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left. But Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces, and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. So Elijah sets out this challenge. He says, okay, we're going to figure this out. For once and for all. We're going to have these sacrifices set up. We're going to cut up these bulls and we're going to put them on these altars. And then I'm going to ask the Lord, and you're going to ask Baal, and we're going to see who lights this sacrifice on fire. And this is the challenge. And everybody says, okay, cool. We can do that. Verse 25, Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. And so they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. So from morning till noon. I'm not sure if this is 6 a.m. or 9 a.m., but either way, it's either 6 or 3 hours. That's a long time to stand there and shout and dance around an altar. Baal, answer us. Light this on fire. Whatever it is they're doing. Going crazy around the fire. are going crazy around the altar, hoping it will be lit on fire. And this is cool. Verse 27, at noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he said. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he's deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. And so they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears as was their custom until their blood flowed. Midday passed and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. All day long, these prophets continue to ask Baal to light the sacrifice on fire. They even cut themselves. They shout louder. They do all these things hoping that he will hear. And nothing. Not even a little bit. And so Baal is silent. Here's what happens. Verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, come here to me. They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it a third time, he ordered, and they did it the third time. The water ran down the altar and even filled the trench. So Elijah is preparing his sacrifice. Baal hasn't answered. Baal's still doing his own thing. Baal's not real. But Elijah prepares the sacrifice. He pours water, has them pour water on it 3 separate times, 12 large jars of water. It is soaked. Now, when I started this fire, there was some dead wood in it, but everything was really dry, and it started really quickly. Have you ever tried to light wet wood on fire? Doesn't work. Like, straight up doesn't work. And yet Elijah says, let's keep going. Fill up the trench. Fill up everything. Let the water run all over it and soak it all through. This is the exact opposite thing you want to do if you are starting a fire. This makes no sense until you keep reading. Verse 36. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Every time I look at this and every time I teach it, I always point out that this prayer says nothing about fire. Nothing. It only says, turn their hearts back. Show them, God, who you are. Let them know that you are God and turn their hearts back. That's it. I mean, I'll read it again, just in case you don't believe me. Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. No mention of fire. No mention of, prove that Baal isn't real. No, prove that God is real. Verse 38. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Elijah doesn't ask for fire, and yet he gets a fire so hot that it not only burns up the sacrifice, it burns up the wood, it burns up the rocks, and licks up the water around the trench. Like, this is fire. Like, this fire, if I pour water on it, it's gonna stop. If I poured water on it before I tried, it wouldn't light. And yet, God sends fire that burns up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and all the water. And the people freak out. You say, okay, James, well, what does this have to do with trust? Well, imagine you're Elijah. You are facing off against hundreds of people who don't believe the same things you believe. They believe in a God made of stone, Baal, this Canaanite God, this God that no one has ever seen do it. They just imagine it. And Elijah squares off against these guys. It's rough going, man. When you are outnumbered big time, it's hard to keep going. But not only does he have confidence in who God is, he provokes the prophet. And on top of that, doesn't even ask God for fire, just says, God, just prove yourself. I know who you are. And God comes through in a major way. Elijah continues to show that God is powerful and God is in control. He shows that God is really God. And he trusts God. I mean, what happens next in the story is that Elijah says, all right, round up all these prophets of Baal, kill them. That was what was going to happen to Elijah if God did not light the fire. Do you trust God with your life? Do you trust God to come through in the clutch? Or do you doubt and wonder if he's really there? I understand doubts and stuff. Like, this last year has caused a lot of us to really have some questions and doubts, and we felt loneliness, and we felt fear, and we felt all sorts of things. But do we trust that God is going to come through in the clutch? That God is going to be faithful? That God will be with us? So I just want to ask you today, will you be someone who trusts as Elijah trusts? When it's all on the line, when everything is stacked up, will you have faith?